concluded at length that this was the best use it could put me to, and had never thought to avail itself of my services in some way. I saw that, if there was a wall of stone between me and my townsmen, there was still a more difficult one to climb or break through before they could get to be as free as I was. I did not for a moment feel confined, and the walls seemed a great waste of stone and mortar. I felt as if I alone of all my townsmen had paid my tax. They plainly did not know how to treat me, but behaved as persons who are underbred. In every threat and in every compliment there was a blunder, for they thought that my chief desire was to stand the other side of that stone wall. I could not but smile to see how industriously they locked the door on my meditations, which followed them out again without let or hindrance, and they were really all that was dangerous. As they could not reach me, they had resolved to punish my body, just as boys, if they cannot come at some person against whom they have a spite, will abuse his dog. I saw that the state was half-witted, that it was timid as a lone woman with her silver spoons, and that it did not know its friends from its foes, and I lost all my remaining respect for it, and pitied it. Thus the state, never intentionally, confronts a man's sense, intellectual or moral, but only his body, his senses. It is not armed with superior wit or honesty, but with superior physical strength. I was not born to be forced. I will breathe after my own fashion. Let us see who is the strongest. What force has a multitude? They only can force me who obey a higher law than I. They force me to become like themselves. I do not hear of men being forced to live this way or that by masses of men. What sort of life were that to live? When I meet a government which says to me, "Your money or your life," why should I be in haste to give it my money? It may be in a great strait, and not know what to do. I cannot help that. It must help itself. Do as I do. It is not worth the while to snivel about it. I am not responsible for the successful working of the machinery of society. I am not the son of the engineer. I perceive that, when an acorn and a chestnut fall side by side, the one does not remain inert to make way for the other, but both obey their own laws, and spring and grow and flourish as best they can, till one, perchance, overshadows and destroys the other. If a plant cannot live according to its nature, it dies, and so a man. The night in prison was novel and interesting enough. The prisoners in their shirt-sleeves were enjoying a chat and the evening air in the doorway when I entered, but the jailer said, "Come, boys, it is time to lock up," and so they dispersed, and I heard the sound of their steps returning into the hollow apartments. My roommate was introduced to me by the jailer as, quote, "a first-rate fellow and a clever man," end quote. When the door was locked, he showed me where to hang my hat, and how he managed matters there. The rooms were whitewashed once a month, and this one, at least, was the whitest, most simply furnished, and probably the neatest apartment in the town. He naturally wanted to know where I came from, and what brought me there, and, when I had told him, I asked him in my turn how he came there, presuming him to be an honest man, and of course, as the world goes, I believe he was. "Why," he said, "they accuse me of burning a barn, but I never did it." As near as I could discover, he had probably gone to bed in a barn when drunk, and smoked his pipe there, and so a barn was burnt. He had the reputation of being a clever man, had been there some 3 months waiting for his trial to come on, and would have to wait as much longer. But he was quite domesticated and contented, since he got his board for nothing, and thought that he was well treated. He occupied one window and I the other, and I saw that, if one stayed there long enough, his principal business would be to look out the window. I had soon read all the tracts that were left there, and examined where former prisoners had broken out, and where a grate had been sawed off, and heard the history of the various occupants of that room, for I found that here there was a story and a gossip which never circulated beyond the walls of the jail. Probably this is the only house in the town where verses are composed, which are afterward printed in a circular form, but not published. I was shown quite a long list of verses which were composed by some young men who had been detected in an attempt to escape, who avenged themselves by singing them. I pumped my fellow prisoner as dry as I could, for fear I should never see him again. But at length he showed me which bed was mine, and left me to blow out the lamp. It was like traveling into a far country, such as I had never expected to behold, to lie there for one night. It seemed to me that I never had heard the town clock strike before, nor the evening sounds of the village, for we slept with the windows open, which were inside the grating. It was to see my native village in the light of the Middle Ages, and our Concord was turned into a Rhine stream, and visions of knights and castles passed before me. They were the voices of old burglars that I heard in the streets. I was an involuntary spectator and auditor of whatever was done and said in the kitchen of the adjacent village inn, a wholly new and rare experience to me. It was a closer view of my native town. I was fairly inside of it. I never had seen its institutions before. This is one of its peculiar institutions, for it is a shire town. I began to comprehend what its inhabitants were about. In the morning our breakfasts were put through a hole in the door, in small oblong square tin pans, made to fit, and holding a pint of chocolate, with brown bread and an iron spoon. When they called for the vessels again, I was green enough to return what bread I had left, but my comrade seized it, and said that I should lay that up for lunch or dinner. Soon after, he was let out to work at haying in a neighboring field, whither he went every day. It would not be back until noon. Probably slave labor. Anyway. So he bade me good day, saying that he doubted if he should see me again. When I came out of prison, for someone interfered and paid that tax, I did not perceive that great changes had taken place on the common, such as he observed who went in a youth, and emerged a tottering and grey-headed man. And yet a change had to my eyes come over the scene, the town, the state, the country, greater than any that mere time could effect. I saw yet more distinctly the state in which I lived. State with a capital S. I saw more distinctly the state in which I lived. I saw to what extent the people among whom I lived could be trusted as good neighbors and friends, that their friendship was for summer weather only, that they did not greatly propose to do right, that they were a distinct race from me by their prejudices and superstitions, as the Chinamen and Malays are, that, in their sacrifices to humanity, they ran no risks, not even to their property, that, after all, they were not so noble but they treated the thief as he had treated them, and hoped by a certain outward observance and a few prayers, and by walking in a particular straight though useless path from time to time, to save their souls. This may be to judge my neighbors harshly, for I believe that many of them are not aware that they have such an institution as the jail in their village. It was formerly the custom in our village, when a poor debtor came out of jail, for his acquaintances to salute him, looking through their fingers, which were crossed to represent the grating of a window jail. How do you do? My neighbors did not thus salute me, but first looked at me and then at one another, as if I had returned from a long journey. I was put into jail as I was going to the shoemaker's to get a shoe which was mended. When I was let out the next morning, I proceeded to finish my errand, and having put on my mended shoe, joined a huckleberry party who were impatient to put themselves under my conduct. And in half an hour, for the horse was soon tackled. I don't know what that means. The horse was soon tackled. Was in the midst of a huckleberry field, on one of our highest hills, 2 miles off, and then the state was nowhere to be seen. This is the whole history of my prisons. I have never declined paying the highway tax, because I am as desirous of being a good neighbor as I am of being a bad subject. And, as for supporting schools, I am doing my part to educate my fellow countrymen now. Love y'all. It is for no particular item in the tax bill that I refuse to pay it. I simply wish to refuse allegiance to the state, to withdraw and stand aloof from it effectually. I do not care to trace the course of my dollar, if I could, till it buys a man or a musket to shoot one with. The dollar is innocent, but I am concerned to trace the effects of my allegiance. In fact, I quietly declare war with the state, after my fashion, though I will still make what use and get what advantage of her as I can, as is usual in such cases. If others pay the tax which is demanded of me, from a sympathy with the state, they do but what they have already done in their own case, or rather they abet injustice to a greater extent than the state requires. If they pay the tax from a mistaken interest in the individual taxed, if they pay the tax from a mistaken interest in the individual who is taxed, to save his property or prevent his going to jail, it is because they have not considered wisely how far they let their private feelings interfere with the public good. This, then, is my position at present. But one cannot be too much on his guard in such a case, lest his actions be biased by obstinacy or an undue regard for the opinions of men. Let him see that he does only what belongs to himself and to the hour. 1 hour at a time. All right. I think sometimes, why this people mean well. They are only ignorant. They would do better if they knew how. Why give your neighbors this pain to treat you as they are not inclined to? But I think again, this is no reason why I should do as they do, or permit others to suffer such much greater pain of a different kind. Again, I sometimes say to myself, when many millions of men, without heat, without ill will, without personal feeling of any kind, demand of you a few shillings, only without the possibility, such is their constitution, of retracting or altering their present demand, and without the possibility, on your side, of appeal to any other millions, why expose yourself to this overwhelming brute force? You do not resist cold and hunger, the winds and the waves, thus obstinately. You quietly submit to 1,000 similar necessities. You do not put your head into the fire. But just in proportion as I regard this as not wholly a brute force, but partly a human force, and consider that I have relations to those millions as to so many millions of men, and not of mere brute or inanimate things, and consider, let me start from, but just in proportion as I regard this as not wholly a brute force, but partly a human force, and consider that I have relations to those millions as to millions of men, and not of mere brute or inanimate things, I see that appeal is possible, first and instantaneously, from them to the Maker of them, Maker with a capital M, and secondly, from them to themselves. But if I put my head deliberately into the fire, there is no appeal to fire or to the maker of the fire, and I have only myself to blame. If I could convince myself that I have any right to be satisfied with men as they are, and to treat them accordingly, and not according, in some respects, to my requisitions and expectations of what they and I ought to be, then, like a good Muslim and fatalist, Mussulman, I read Muslim because I thought that was what he was trying to say, but I don't know what Mussulman, capital Mussulman, is supposed to be. There's a footnote, but I didn't look it up. Hold on. Well, let's find out what a Mussulman is. Oh, it is Muslim. Damn it. All right. I'll start at the beginning of that sentence. If I could convince myself that I have any right to be satisfied with men as they are, and treat them accordingly, and not according in some respects to my requisitions and expectations of what they and I ought to be, then, like a good Muslim and fatalist, I should endeavor to be satisfied with things as they are, and say it is the will of God. And, above all, there is this difference between resisting this and a purely brute or natural force, that I can resist this with some effect, but I cannot expect, like Orpheus, to change the nature of the rocks and trees and beasts. I do not wish to quarrel with any man or nation. I do not wish to split hairs, to make fine distinctions, or set myself up as better than my neighbors. I seek rather, I may say, even an excuse for conforming to the laws of the land. I am but too ready to conform to them. Indeed, I have reason to suspect myself on this head, and each year, as the tax-gatherer comes around, I find myself disposed to review the acts and position of the general and state governments and the spirit of the people, to discover a pretext for conformity. There's another poem. We must affect our country as our parents, and if at any time we alienate our love or industry from doing it honor, we must respect effects and teach the soul matter of conscience and religion, and not desire of rule or benefit. And that's the end of the poem, or whatever you want to call that. I believe that the state will soon be able to take all my work of this sort out of my hands, and then I shall be no better a patriot than my fellow countrymen. Seen from a lower point of view, the Constitution, with all its faults, is very good. The law and the courts are very respectable. Even this state and this American government are, in many respects, very admirable and rare things to be thankful for, such as a great many have described them. But seen from a point of view a little higher, they are what I have described them. Seen from a higher still, and the highest, who shall say what they are, or that they are worth looking at or thinking of at all? However, the government, are you paying attention? Are you paying attention to them? Paying your attention? Let me reread this. I believe that the state will soon be able to take all my work of this sort out of my hands, and then I shall be no better a patriot than my fellow countrymen. Seen from a lower point of view, the Constitution, with all its faults, is very good. The law and the courts are very respectable. Even this state and this American government are, in many respects, very admirable and rare things to be thankful for, such as a great many have described them. But seen from a point of view a little higher, they are what I have described them. Seen from a higher still, and the highest, Who shall say what they are, or that they are worth looking at or thinking of at all? That they're worth paying attention, your sweet, sweet attention to at all. However, the government does not concern me much, and I shall bestow the fewest possible thoughts on it. It is not many moments that I live under a government, even in this world. If a man is thought-free, fancy-free, imagination-free, that which is not, never for a long time appearing to be, to him, unwise rulers or reformers cannot fatally interrupt him. I know that most men think differently from myself, but those whose lives are by profession devoted to the study of these or kindred subjects content me as little as any. Statesmen and legislators, standing so completely within the institution, never distinctly and nakedly behold it. They speak of moving society, but have no resting place without it. They may be men of a certain experience in discrimination, and have no doubt invented ingenious and even useful systems, for which we sincerely thank them. But all their wit and usefulness lie within certain not very wide limits. They are wont to forget that the world is not governed by policy and expediency. Webster never goes behind government, and so cannot speak with authority about it. His words are wisdom to those legislators who contemplate no essential reform in the existing government. But for thinkers and those who legislate for all time, he never once glances at the subject. I know of those whose serene and wise speculations on this theme would soon reveal the limits of his mind's range and hospitality. Yet, compared with the cheap professions of most reformers, and the still cheaper wisdom and eloquence of politicians in general, his are almost the only sensible and valuable words, and we thank heaven for him. Still talking about Webster here. Comparatively, he is always strong, original, and above all practical. Still, his quality is not wisdom, but prudence. The lawyer's truth is not truth with a capital T, but consistency, or consistent expediency. Truth is always in harmony with herself, and is not concerned chiefly to reveal the justice that may consist with wrongdoing. He well deserves to be called, as he has been called, the defender of the Constitution. There are really no blows to be given at him. There are really no blows to be given by him, but defensive ones. He is not a leader, but a follower. His leaders are the men of '87. I have never made an effort, he says, and never proposed to make an effort. I have never countenanced an effort, and never mean to countenance an effort, to disturb the arrangement as originally made, by which the various states came into the Union. End quote. Still thinking of the sanction which the Constitution gives to slavery. Hard to get those words mixed up. Still thinking of the sanction which the Constitution gives to slavery, he says, quote, because it was a part of the original compact, let it stand, end quote. Notwithstanding his special acuteness and ability, he is unable to take a fact out of its merely political relations and behold it as it lies absolutely to be disposed of by the intellect. What, for instance, it behooves a man to do here in America today with regard to slavery, but ventures or is driven to make some such desperate answer as the following, while professing to speak absolutely, and as a private man, from which what new and singular code of social duties might be inferred. The manner, says he, in which the governments of those states where slavery exists are to regulate it, is for their own consideration, under their responsibility to their constituents, to the general laws of propriety, humanity, and justice, and to God. Associations formed elsewhere, springing from a feeling of humanity, or any other cause, have nothing whatever to do with it. They have never received any encouragement from me, and they never will." End quote. They who know of no purer sources of truth, who have traced up its stream no higher, stand, and wisely stand, by the Bible and the Constitution, and drink at it there with reverence and humility. But they who behold where it comes trickling into this lake or that pool, gird up their loins once more, and continue their pilgrimage toward its fountainhead. No man with a genius for legislation has appeared in America. They are rare in the history of the world. There are orators, politicians, and eloquent men by the thousands. But the speaker has not yet opened his mouth to speak, who is capable of settling the much vexed questions of the day. We love eloquence for its own sake, and not for any truth which it may utter, or any heroism it may inspire. Our legislators have not yet learned the comparative value of free trade, and of freedom, of union, and of rectitude to a nation. They have no genius or talent for comparatively humble questions of taxation and finance, commerce and manufactures and agriculture. If we were left solely to the wordy wit of legislators in Congress for our guidance, uncorrected by the seasonable experience and the effectual complaints of the people, America would not long retain her rank among the nations. For 1800 years, though perchance I have no right to say it, the New Testament has been written. Yet where is the legislator who has wisdom and practical talent enough to avail himself of the light which it sheds on the science of legislation? The authority of government, even such as I am willing to submit to, for I will cheerfully obey those who know and can do better than I, and in many things even those who neither know nor can do so well, is still an impure one. The authority of government, that is still an impure one. To be strictly just, it must have the sanction and consent of the governed. It can have no pure right over my person and property but what I concede to it. The progress from an absolute to a limited monarchy, from a limited monarchy to a democracy, is a progress toward toward a true respect for the individual. Even the Chinese philosopher was wise enough to regard the individual as the basis of the empire. Is a democracy, such as we now know it, the last improvement possible in government? Is it not possible to take a step further toward recognizing and organizing the rights of man? There will never be a really free and enlightened state until the state comes to recognize the individual as a higher and independent power, from which all its own power and authority are derived, and treats him accordingly. I please myself with imagining a state, at last, which can afford to be just to all men, and to treat the individual with respect as a neighbor, which even would not think it inconsistent with his own repose, if a few were to live aloof from it, not meddling with it, nor embraced by it, who fulfilled all the duties of neighbors and fellow-men. A state which bore this kind of fruit, and suffered it to drop off as fast as it ripened, would prepare the way for a still more perfect and glorious state, which also I have imagined, but not yet anywhere seen. And that's partly because people are trying to obey only the man-made laws. Those are the most concerning laws to most people. Now, I know a lot of you don't like religion, and I can't blame you. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's a lot of wonderful wisdom in some of the scriptures, especially the Gospel of the Essenes. Might want to look into that one if you haven't heard of it. What I'm getting at is that there's a natural law. There's a law that supersedes man's laws. And it would behoove us to inquire as to what they are, acknowledge them, and to adhere to them and obey them. There's nothing wrong with obedience if you're obeying a just law. Like if someone says, don't murder, don't kill. Well, you're not being a pussy, obedient person. There's nothing wrong with obedience in that situation, is what I'm getting at. Same goes for, I don't know, don't cook your food. That's a law that I know a lot of you aren't quite ready for. But it's a law. And I know it's inconvenient. Boy, is that cooked food tasty. It's not natural, though. And we're going to have to give it up. Wow, an hour and 19 minutes. Well, kudos if you made it this far. I hope you enjoyed this reading of Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience. I guess that's it. I would like to say one more thing. If there are still any service people out there still watching, any cops, any, especially soldiers, this applies to soldiers most of all, boot camp is obedience school for humans. That's why they give you dog tags. You're more than a soldier. You could do a lot more for humanity than kill. If every man who had ever gone to fight a war had been given a little bit of land and some seeds and some time, the world would be a very different place. And another thing, just because it's been on my mind lately, because I've been dissecting various religious beliefs and catching flack for it. It's so funny because so many people, if you said this to someone, religion's bad. Religion's fucking everything up. religion's problematic to humanity. They'll be like, yeah, yeah, totally. But then if you pick a religion, well, Christianity for some reason it seems to be okay. To seems to be PC to make fun of Christianity, even though it's potentially, depending on what kind of Christian you are, it can be a very nice religion. Anyway, what I'm getting at is, as soon as you pick a religion, particularly Judaism or Islam, if you say there's a problem with either of those, oh, you're anti-Semitic, or oh, you're an Islamophobe. First of all, why are they even different? Like, why are they even different words? Why wouldn't it just be Jewophobe? The cat just freaked out. Anyway, we should be free to investigate the heinous and nonsensical beliefs of any group, especially if it's causing them to do us harm. More on this later, I guess. I feel like I shouldn't be stealing the thunder or diluting civil disobedience too much. Although now it's over, you can just turn this off if you know if you don't like my commentary. Anyway, yeah, it's been an hour and a half, so I'm gonna go do something else. But I love you all so much. So much. No matter who you are. We're all in this together. Paradise is possible. All right, peace.